the Vice Chancellor, Gombe State University, ably represented by the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academics, the Commandant NDLEA, other principal officers of the university, our Sheikh. Good morning, everybody. I am happy to be home once again. 2013, I was here in Gombe State University for a one-year sabbatical. And for at least 5 years now, I have not been to the campus. But today I'm back and I'm happy with what I have seen. Lots of development within the campus. I pray for continued progress for the university. Now, my topic is about the legislation on drug abuse in northeast Nigeria. But of course, we need some background information, even though my job has been made very easy by the commandant. But of course, we need to probably recap some of the things he mentioned. Medical legal use of medicines, I must say, revolves around what we call medication safety. And then it implies that the prescriber, we have medical students here, the prescriber will prescribe the right drug to the right patient with the right dose, and that must be administered through the right route and at the right time. So anything outside of these ones will lead us to, drug misuse. So if it is not any of this is missing, for example, if you are taking the incorrect dose of the medicine, or probably you are skipping a dose, or an incomplete amount of the drug and so on, that will be drug misuse now. But a more critical one which we are talking about now is substance abuse. Now I'm not using drug abuse, but I'm using substance abuse because it may include other substances other than drugs itself. So the definition of substance abuse has been given by the commandant, and of course it is what we call compulsive use of medicines even when there are deleterious adverse effects of these drugs in later life. And that normally will lead to drug addiction. Addiction also has been defined by the commandant. But just to recap, it's a brain disorder that is characterized by compulsive engagement in rewarding stimuli despite adverse consequences of using some of these drugs. The definition is also given by APA, American Psychiatric Association, and so on. Okay? So the most important thing about drug addiction, of course, is immediate gratification. So there is a reward, and that is why people use it a lot. They get some reward from that. However, in the long time, you have what? Adverse or delayed deleterious effects from the use of some of these medicines. And the reward usually is in the brain. Okay? Now in the brain, you have areas of the brain. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that we now say is implicated in reward processing in the brain. So the dopaminergic pathway has been shown in red. It starts from the midbrain and then projects down to the prefrontal cortex and so on. And then the serotonin is also another neurotransmitter that has been implicated in reward. So in most cases, you will find that whenever somebody takes these medicines, then dopamine will now be released in the brain, and it causes some feeling of euphoria, satisfaction, and all of that one. So because of that, people want to repeat those things and so on. Dopaminergic pathway, serotonergic pathway has been shown here. So the commonly abused substances, as we all know, is alcohol, for example. Then we have POMs, prescription-only medicines. Then we have illegal, illicit drugs. Over-the-counter medicines are also used. And then there are unconventional substances that are used within the population. For example, the POMs that are commonly abused are opioid analgesics like morphine, pethidine, codeine, tramadol, particularly tramadol alone. There you go. So particularly tramadol among the youth. Then we have hypnotic sedative agents, benzodiazepines, and so on. We have tricyclic antidepressants, psychostimulants like ephedrine, amphetamines, which are stimulants, they are also used. Okay? OTMs, over-the-counter medicines, also are used, particularly nowadays cough suppressants. Tutolin, I'm sure everybody has heard of those ones, that contains codeine, dextromethorphan, and pseudoephedrine sometimes. Cold medicines that contain pseudoephedrine, motion sickness pills such as dimenhydrinate are very commonly used. Illegal drugs, illicit substances, cannabis, marijuana, cocaine, LSD, phencyclidine, and a host of others, anabolic steroids, are substances that are commonly abused by our population. Particularly cannabis, we will see much later that cannabis is being used a lot in our communities. Okay? Then there are unconventional substances also. People who may probably not be able to get some of those ones we mentioned, or they cannot afford it, they go for some other things. Like shisha is very common. Lizard, animal waste, particularly lizard waste and human excreta, they are being sniffed. Ventilated spirit, chloroform, and of course solvents, shalashu and all of those ones you can see, they are being used here by the population, particularly the youth. Now I casually look at the demography, the people that use some of these medicines. You will take the UNODC chart, 2017 report, or rather 2018 report, UNODC, of the number of prevalence of drug abuse among Nigerians. You will see the Northeast is here, okay? And most of it, you will find high use of these medicines. The last one here is about 26%, and most of the states in the Northeast, they have this problem then. Particularly Gombe State is one of 2 states only in Nigeria that have the highest prevalence of drug abuse. The only least one that we have, probably like this one, is what we have in Borno State. So most of the Northeast has been engulfed in drug abuse. Now, what are these substances? How are they consumed? Cannabis appears to be the one that is commonly abused. That is wiwiko and all of that one, okay? Or grass, or whatever you call it. About 10.6 million people abuse cannabis. The least is probably, can see from here now. So, but followed by prescription-only medicines like cough suppressants, opioid analgesics, cough suppressants, and benzodiazepines. So quite I think the reason why probably cannabis has been used a lot is because probably of its availability. You find it a lot within the community. So, but the least one is cocaine. So not everybody sees cocaine, and that is why probably cocaine is not very commonly abused. About 284 million people globally between the ages of 15 to 64, I heard Mustafa mention that one, they use substances, they abuse substances rather, and 14.3 million around this age also within Nigeria, 15 to 64 years of age, they also abuse, they are the ones that abuse these medicines. I think probably that will amount to about 5% of the global population, which is a large figure. A more disturbing situation is the fact that 1 out of 4 of these abusers are women. Particularly in our community here, we know that probably women do not engage in so many other things, But somehow we now found out that women consume some of these substances a lot, okay? So that is very disturbing because women are supposed to be the mothers that will now, give good parenting to their children. So if they are abusers, then it means the whole population will be abusing drugs. Now, the number of initiates, according to UNODC, also, we've heard the commandant mention it that even neonates may abuse drugs, probably through their mothers. But the most disturbing thing here, 67% of those who initiate, who start drug abuse, they are what? They are teenagers, okay? So teenagers are supposed to be the ones probably within just finishing their secondary school and going to what? The university. So these are people that we expect will go to the university and acquire good knowledge and skill and come and work in the society. But unfortunately, they have the highest number of people who initiate drug abuse. Then you have probably young adults, much less percentage. Then you have some old people. Sometimes medical doctors, physicians also, they create drug abusers. For example, somebody has a chronic situation, chronic disease in the hospital, and then they are using some opioid analgesics, and even after treatment, probably he will continue to use some of those. That's why you have elderly people probably also going into drug abuse. Okay? So the reasons are not far-fetched. We have mentioned reward. Okay? But sometimes for the teenagers, it's experimental curiosity. Okay? So due to peer group influence, they have seen their neighbors trying some of these things like cannabis. They will also want to partake in some of these ones. So from the experiment, they will now continue, and then they become abusers gradually. Then, of course, we may mention lack of parental supervision, but nowadays, which is very difficult, particularly when they are grown up in family where all the parents go to work and so on and so on. Personality problems may create, so if somebody is feeling low self-esteem, he will be advised probably to use some of these drugs, and then at the end of the day, he becomes an abuser. Okay? The need for energy to work for long hours. The commandant mentioned that some people have this notion that when they use some of these medicines or substances, it will improve their sexual capability. But at the end of the day, it will not, but they will become abusers and so on. But more importantly, probably, is the availability of these drugs. Okay? So these drugs are very much commonly available within us, and that is mainly the reason why the abuse comes about, particularly by the youth. Okay? The impact of substance abuse on the user: social isolation, stagnation, damaged relationships, financial distress because you need more money. When we say compulsive, that means even when you don't have the means, you have to find a way. Because there is dependence. In addiction, there is dependence. And dependence, we know, you will have physical dependence, and probably you may have psychological dependence. Physical dependence ensures that you must go all out, no matter how, and get these things. So if you are buying it and you don't have money, then you have to find a way of getting money, and then so you continue probably to borrow initially and so on. So there will be financial distress on the person. Then health problems, some of which the commandant has mentioned. Other diseases like depression and anxiety and so on. Okay? Then the most critical one at the end of the day may probably be death of the patient. Okay? The impact on the society is very critical, like ill health, leading to financial distress. We have mentioned low productivity because most of the abusers are the young ones, so they are supposed to be working and they are not working, so we lose probably. There will be broken homes, issues to do with work because there will be difficulty holding your employment because of absence in the workplace. Today you are not there, tomorrow you are not there, and they will throw you out. But more importantly, I now boldened increased participation in income-generating crime so that you get money and continue with the business. And probably this is what is leading to more crime in the society. Environmental damage is also there. Economic consequences: the society loses a lot of money due to loss in productivity, about 120 billion, it has been reported, dollars annually. Healthcare costs may exacerbate this financial or economic consequence, about $11 billion annually just to treat some of these abusers. Then, of course, criminal justice court, because NDLA has to now arraign people in the catch in the court, and it takes a lot of money to do some of that. So a lot of economic consequences are attached to drug abuse. The health consequences of substance abuse: virtually every organ of the body may be affected, by some of these substances. Every organ of the body. So there may be lung diseases, cancer, heart attack and stroke, deteriorating mental health, particularly because most of these substances, they affect the brain a lot. Most of the effect is on the brain, so there will be deteriorating mental health condition. Poor personal hygiene. Most of the people that use substances, you can even identify them, because they look dirty and disoriented and so on. Then susceptibility to infectious diseases such as HIV, STDs, and the rest of them. Okay? drugs, okay? So the effect on the youth, there will be academic effects, okay. Declining grades particularly. Some of them are getting good grades, and when they start abusing drugs, the grades begin to go down because they will be absent in school. There will be increased potential for dropping out of school because they cannot perform. There are medical effects. We have mentioned HIV, AIDS, hepatitis, other infectious diseases. Mental health also we have mentioned because the drugs used in this thing. Now the crux of the matter is, of my talk rather, is on the policies, the legislation, okay? The laws that are supposed to help in combating some of these drug abuse, okay? When you go down to history lane or memory lane, the first known law that has been promulgated in Nigeria to tackle drug abuse was in 1935, even before Nigeria was born. They call it the what? Dangerous Drugs Ordinance, okay, of 1935, okay? And this law empowers the Board of Customs and Excise and the police to deal with drug abusers. Many years later, there was no any other law until 1966. Yes, the government of J.T. Agui-Ironsi promulgated the Indian Hemp Cannabis Decree of 1966. And then in that decree, they prohibit cultivation, and they even prescribe death penalty for those who cultivate Indian hemp, because at that time it was actually Indian hemp that is mostly in use by Nigerians at that time. And there's 10 years imprisonment for those who export some of these substances. Again, 10 years imprisonment for smoking or possession of these substances. Now, the Indian Hemp Decree of 66 was now amended in 1975 by the government of Gowon, I think, and they abolished the death penalty and other serious offenses, other punitive measures in this thing. But they introduced strokes of cane and 6 months for possession of, and probably a fine for possession of Indian hemp. In 1984, the Indian Hemp Decree of 66 was further amended, and they reintroduced the death penalty. Any person under the age of 17 also was to be given 21 strokes of the cane, 2 years in Boston, and a fine of 200 naira at that time. So that was in 1984. Then a special, later in 1984 also, if we do remember, that was Yohan Buhari Idiabon. They also now created a miscellaneous offenses a decree, and even came up with a tribunal, rather, a miscellaneous special tribunal for this one, so that they can find people who abuse drugs in Nigeria. And then a jail term of not less than 14 years was prescribed for buying, exposing for sale of some of these substances later. But due to the outcry, the death penalty has been expunged in that decree. So later in 1986, the 84 decree was further amended, and the imprisonment was reintroduced, rather, life imprisonment was also reintroduced, and also the death penalty. So the tribunal also continues to work, okay? And another feature that was introduced at that time was the forfeiture of assets and passport for traffickers, because at that time it became very worrisome that even the United States of America was to decertify Nigeria, because Nigeria became a hub, or rather a transit, for some of these trafficking of some of these substances, and that was why they had to introduce punitive measures, okay? In 1989, Decree 40 was enacted, leading to the establishment of the National Drug Law Enforcement Agencies. Earlier in 1988, there was a UN Convention against illicit drugs, and that was the impetus, the impulse for the formulation of this decree in 1989, which led to the creation of a NDLEA. And NDLEA, we will see later, it was empowered to deal with drug abusers. Which is, so the NDLEA, as we have heard today, is a federal agency that is charged with eliminating the growing, processing, manufacturing, and all of those for illicit drugs in Nigeria. Another notable drug control policy, okay, there's another one, control policy in Nigeria was the money laundering decree of number 3 that was promulgated also in 1995. And that gave NDLEA powers to even put surveillance, to tap telephone lines and put surveillance on bank accounts of people that are suspected to be trafficking drugs. Okay? So all of those laws that we have mentioned much earlier, they actually directly deal with illicit drugs and substances. But unfortunately, the prescription-only medicines and over-the-counter medicines are not included. However, the POMs and OTCs, they may be covered by some of these laws here that have been mentioned, particularly the law enacted creating NAFDAC, for example, and other laws that we have mentioned here. So NAFDAC, for example, was charged with the regulation of importation, manufacture, distribution, warehousing, sales, and use of these medicines in Nigeria. Partnering with it is the Pharmacy Council of Nigeria, and this one monitor and the practice of pharmacists, particularly of pharmacy professionals. And these are the ones that have been licensed under this decree to import, export, warehouse, distribute, sell of these medicines. So there is need for supervision on some of these things. But the question I said we want to ask ourselves is, why are these policies and legislations not effective? We have mentioned that since 1935, we have seen some of these laws down to 2000 or 2023 or so, but it appears we have not been able to get a free drug society in Nigeria. So are these policies not, why are these policies rather not effective? Then do we need further? Being the fact that Northeast Nigeria is also within Nigeria, so all of these laws that we have mentioned, they also relate to Northeast Nigeria. So do we further need policies and legislations in Northeast Nigeria? So I think probably some of the reasons that have been put forward as the reasons why these policies failed, for example, is the fact that there is underfunding, for example. Underfunding of agencies that are supposed to monitor the use, sale, and distribution of some of these medicines, like the NDLEA, for example. They may not be capable to go around the country and probably do whatever they want to do. Even the other agencies like NAFDAC, they don't have their presence in every nook and cranny of the country and so on. But a more important reason why the laws failed probably is the fact that we consider drug abuse as a crime, for example. I'm happy when I hear the commandant today, he said they have a different perception or view right now. So by placing NDLEA under Ministry of Justice, it means that they have considered drug users as criminals, and therefore they chase them and they incarcerate them and all of that. But we need to view drug abuse as a public health problem, so that we will approach it in that manner. And that is why some of these activities that we are doing, outreach programs, and other advocacies, the NDLEA director also mentioned a lot of advocacies that they are doing today. That means they have also changed focus. These are the things I think that will stem the tide of drug abuse in our societies, and not some of these draconian laws that we apply to the users. So probably this one I got it from NDLEA website. Posters like this will go a long way in combating drug abuse. And like the NDLEA director and my MC also mentioned, for us to have a drug-free society, we need to, all of us, we need to key into it. We have to join hands, all of us, either probably as an educator, a counselor, or probably as a law enforcement agent, or probably you just give information to the agencies that are responsible for monitoring some of these activities. And that way, and only that way, we'll be able to eradicate substance abuse in Nigeria. Thank you very much for the opportunity.